Hey, everybody. Hopefully you all can hear and see us. Welcome to another POCUS AMA. Super excited to have our guest today, Angelica from Vercel, and really excited to talk about all things intent and signals and how do you use both of those to drive your go-to-market playbooks. If you're new to POCUS AMAs, these are our opportunity to ask experts like Angelica all of your burning questions in an informal, very chill environment. So feel free to ask all of your questions in the chat as we're talking, and we'll pause briefly to incorporate the questions into the AMA. And maybe to get started, if everybody could just write in the chat your name, where you're calling in from, your company, your role, just so Angelica gets to know like what the mix of the audience is, and get to know all of you a little bit better. Continue to ask questions in the chat as we go. And I think that's it for housekeeping items, but I'm so excited to have you here today, Angelica. We have been talking about this topic now for a little while. I think I was introduced to you because I talked to somebody else on the Vercel marketing team, and I was like, who's got the best takes on intent and signals? And they were like, you got to talk to Angelica. So excited to have you on today. Angelica is currently the head of demand gen at Vercel, where she's helping the company scale their PLG acquisition motion. She's an expert in growing developer products and brands. And I think one thing I really loved about my conversation with Angelica was her background in sales development and marketing operations, which I think gives her a unique perspective, also allows her to empathize with her colleagues in sales across the aisle, and really think about things holistically to build this like revenue marketing go-to-market engine. Anything I missed there, Angelica, from your bio?
No, that's perfect. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I would love to just kick off with asking you a little bit more about your role at Vercel, and then tell us a little bit about your background as well, having done sales development and marketing operations, and walk us through that journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I think you gave it a good overview. So basically, I started my career in sales, both in an AE role and also as kind of like the first outbound SDR hire at Neo4j, which was a smaller like graph database startup at the time. They've since grown quite a bit. But eventually, didn't love the sales life, although it's a very valuable experience to have. So I made my way over into marketing, did consulting for a little while, and eventually came back in-house to join Vercel. Vercel, when I started, was like a very nascent marketing team. So we had brand marketing in place. We had like PMM and brand and comms, basically. But we didn't really have any of like the revenue marketing side yet. So I started out actually the same day as our current like VP of marketing, who was like heading up that rev marketing role at the time, and kind of built out our first PLG flows. I went on to like start our first like marketing ops team to support the team as they grew, first marketing analytics team. And now I've made my way back to demand gen, which I'm much more excited about.
That's awesome.
And so sorry to answer your question, basically demand gen at Vercel, essentially we're driving pipeline along with the rest of our marketing and GTM partners. So the main ways we do that are through either building out always on funnels like PLS, product-led sales, declared intent, which for us is mainly contact sales, and auto outbound, which we'll chat about today. And then we do a little bit as well with our more traditional like integrated campaigns and programs with the PMM team.
That's awesome. So just a few things. Before we jump into all of that, I wanted to quickly ask, how does your kind of like sales background and experience inform how you think about partnering with sales today? You mentioned like how you're thinking about outbound. I'm curious like how you think about that, and are there any things that you do differently because you have that kind of like sales background?
Yeah, honestly, I think demand gen is changing a lot, and it's going to go through a little bit of a transformation in the next few years. So I am seeing it overlap a lot more with the rest of GTM. So a lot of like the demand gen campaigns that we run or tactics are really like salesy kind of tactics. So you do like work a lot with the sales team, obviously, even flexing into doing some of the sales activities. And then the same thing with marketing operations as well. Like any of the kind of playbooks we'll go through today rely extremely heavily on marketing ops involvement. And I think it's really invaluable to have some understanding or basic understanding of operations or how systems work, basic flows from like the website through to your Salesforce CRM or whatever you're trying to do. And I think that's really becoming very essential for, the new version of demand generation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I could not agree more. I think the face of kind of like go-to-market tech, how we think about playbooks, all of that is changing a lot. And a lot of it is driven by just the amount of data that's now available, and a slightly different kind of like buying experience that's expected. So obviously PLG came into the mix and, kind of like changed the game for a lot of companies. And I think developer tools were ahead of that curve already because of the unique kind of like requirements developers have for how they want to be sold.
Right.
And so we talked a little bit about this in our previous chat, but data really is like very central to all of this. And we kind of like use these different words. There's data, intent, signal. And I think some of it can feel a little confusing. So maybe just to like level set us before we dive into all of this, what's your definition for an intent signal? And are intent and signals the same thing? Or what's your understanding of that and how do you use it in Vercel?
Yeah, totally. And I agree. Like it gets a little confusing because everyone's using the term slightly differently and like people try and kind of build it up to this big thing. But honestly, an intent signal is literally just anything that tells you that an account is interested in your solution. And that's it. So that can mean such a wide variety of things. You can base it on different data sources, like really first party data, like your website visits data, your product engagement data, are people doing certain things in your product, for example, and then third-party data sources as well. So maybe, job hiring, job changes, social engagement, community engagement's a big one, especially for developer marketing, third-party review sites like G2. So it's really just like a way to categorize like a wide set of data sources, basically, that at aggregate can tell you if an account is interested. Each one of those little data sources or events basically is an intent signal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love how simply you put that. It's just, an intent signal is just telling you whether somebody's interested, and there's like different degrees of interested. Earlier, you mentioned declared intent, which I love that term. Could you tell us a little bit what that means for Vercel?
Yeah, so there's kind of, there's a big difference between the level of intent somebody is showing, right? So somebody who likes a LinkedIn post has a very different level of intent from somebody who maybe visited your pricing page. The highest level of intent for us, we call it declared intent. Declared intent literally means like you've hand raised, you're declaring that, hey, I would like to purchase, or I would like to have a conversation about purchasing. So the most typical example of that is your contact sales form. It can also be something like a self-guided product tour. We have one on our Vercel site, for example, or like a self-guided demo. It could look like requesting an enterprise trial. Like there's different offers, but it's really somebody raising their hand and saying like, hi, I would like to talk to you. We kind of treat that funnel almost separately because there's different optimizations and I think growth strategies to apply there. For the rest of intent signals, like the lower intent stuff, like, hey, you visited our website on a certain page, or hey, you start our GitHub repo or something like that, we'll have kind of more of an automated outbound approach and reach out to those people a bit differently before they declare their intent, basically.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So, the level of intent whether it's declared or a little kind of like more inferred, you could say, will dictate what type of playbook you run. Which I think is the direction I think most people should be heading in. I don't think everyone's quite nailed it yet, because I think there's some challenges, which we'll talk about. But how did you kind of like create this framework? And maybe you could walk us through what this framework looks like for how you use intent and how you build these playbooks.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, a lot of credit to Hypergrowth Partners. There are some advisors for Vercel, Gonto, and G. They helped us develop a lot of this, but essentially what our framework has been is we're leaning, I'll speak more, I think, to the inferred intent or the lower intent. So not people who are contact sales. It's a little bit more straightforward, but we're leaning really into automated outbound and product-led sales right now. So we have different tools that are essentially de-anonymizing and filtering any of the visitors to our site to start. We have some tools that are looking at third-party intent sources as well, like engagement on our website, engagement on our social platforms and community platforms, things like that. And then we really just started with the most obvious, either in-product or website intent signals like page visits, and built out automation. Essentially, that's adding any people who are in our ICP fit who take one of those intent signals and adding them automatically into an outreach sequence. So the whole idea really is that we just want to capitalize on that exact moment where you're thinking about our product and like displaying that intent, and we're reaching out to you like right away with something helpful. It's a really heavy collab for sure with our marketing ops, PMM team, SDR teams. It's a very like cross-functional GTM project.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot of questions about like the actual kind of like mechanics of all of that, of how you align the teams. But before we go there, coming up with the hypotheses around which signals you're going to test, what was that process like? And did you use data to inform that, or was it more driven by like kind of qualitative understanding or kind of feedback from the field?
Yeah, it's a kind of a combination. So to be honest, like if you're literally just getting started, you already know some really obvious ones. So somebody who comes to your pricing page and you de-anonymize them to show like this is, you know, an enterprise-sized account in our ICP, just reach out to them. Like that you don't really need data to tell you that someone on your pricing page has an intent to buy. So we just started with those really obvious ones. But then we have some reporting that's showing us like a propensity to buy. So you do a little bit of like a closed won analysis on your ops and look for kind of any patterns or commonalities basically that people have taken. We've done very basics on that, to be honest. You can get quite far without like a more advanced analytics support. And then the other bit that you touched on, I love, is just the field feedback. So we, Vercel uses Slack. We're very like open and collaborative on Slack. So it's really easy for us just to pop into the sales, or my favorite is the sales engineering channel, and ask quite openly, like, how are you finding people? Like, how are people getting to you? What are some like whatever intent signals that you might want to suggest? And we always get a ton of feedback there. If you're doing in product as well, the product or engineering team equally is collaborative. So I would say like never be afraid to just ask for internal knowledge.
Yeah, I think oftentimes like we want to overcomplicate things. And especially when it comes to, like, oh, we're creating these data-driven playbooks based with intent, it can feel like we need to do things in a more like quantitative scientific way. But especially if you're a small team and you're just getting started, like the crawl, walk, run approach, I really, really believe in. And I think crawling is just what you exactly said, like pick the most obvious things, build hypotheses, and then it's just really about like that experimentation. Really curious about, so you mentioned all of those different stakeholders for your team, kind of who owns what, and if you have any thoughts on like strong opinions on who should own certain things, would love to hear it.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of have one team that's thinking about the program holistically. So for us, that's been the demand gen team. But it's definitely an extremely collaborative project, both for auto outbound and for product-led sales. So your ideal like dream team really should be somebody from like a growth or demand gen position leading it. Marketing operations, product marketing is going to help you a lot with that messaging and positioning. Somebody from the SDR team who's again like your closest DRI or like partner for the program. And then when you really want to scale it out, you're going to need an engineer. And we can get a little bit more into like why engineering becomes important to avoid becoming spammy. But really, yeah, that's your dream team. That's the Tiger team.
I love that. Since you mentioned it, let's go there and talk a little bit about the automated outbound motion. We got some questions ahead of this chat. I think there are a lot of people are wondering, how do you do automated outbound and do it right so it doesn't get too spammy and annoying for buyers? So tell us a little bit about that.
I think it's just about like getting very hyper targeted and specific. Which starts to pose a technical challenge. I think that's why you start really leaning on ops and you really start needing an engineer at some point. But your filtering matters. So your audiences should be precise to either like a certain buyer stage, job role. Like, are you a VP of engineering or are you, a front-end developer? I'm going to say very different things to you. The industry that you're in. You can even start getting fancy and look at like the referral URL before they, visited the pricing page, to keep using that as an example. So did you get to the pricing page by clicking on an upgrade button in the product? Okay, let's tailor the messaging based on where you're coming from or what your mindset is basically. And really like the more precise that you get, the better. At some point you're going to have diminishing returns with volume, but find that inflection. But at that point, really, you are going to need some sort of engineering resource, I think, to help you out. I've spoken to teams that have really like scaled out their auto outbound program much beyond like what Vercel's doing today. And they had that Tiger team that I just mentioned, where you really have DG or growth, ops, and then engineers to really be creating like hyper targeted segments. Mm-hmm. The other advice I would give to is just like your messaging itself is very important. So while you're going to be partnering with PMM to figure out like, hey, somebody who visited this like observability doc, like what are they thinking about? How can I talk to them? I would just try and keep it as like helpful as possible. So like we've seen a lot of success historically with messaging, like, hey, other people who are doing X, Y, and Z tend to ask me for, and then like give them like 2 or 3 bullets of like helpful resources or a next step that you want them to take, basically. Credit to our former VP marketing, Hank, who kind of came up with that, but we literally use that framework today and keep iterating on it. And then finally too, like AI, obviously. So wouldn't be an AMA this year without saying AI, but there are a lot of tools that can help you pull in like different account attributes, for example, to customize each message at scale. So that's something that we haven't done yet at Vercel, but I'm really thinking about like as we're starting to scale things out. I don't want to keep sending the same message to everybody, even if it is a tighter segment. Ideally, each message is a little bit targeted or like tailored depending on what's going on with that account.
Yeah, I love everything you just said. I have so many questions, and I just took a look at the chat. If you have questions for Angelica, please add them. Otherwise, I'm going to keep on monopolizing the conversation. Tactically speaking, do the automated messages like come from individual SDRs, or is this like coming from like, kind of like a, fake account that's like blanket use for the Vercel marketing team?
Yeah, that was a big debate actually. So we are currently sending it from SDRs, which requires a little bit of like a routing, like a contact ownership routing step in your automation. That's a whole thing. But that's kind of been a debate too as we're scaling. For now, like sending from an individual SDR works. It does require obviously like you do some enablement with the SDR team. The benefit is also that they feel a little bit more ownership and you're able to really like ask for feedback more regularly from them. But we have thought about, and I have seen examples of kind of like a fake SDR. So you can give them a name or whatever, and it's essentially your your go-to person, and that filters out a lot of the spammy volume before the replies hit your SDR team. So we haven't hit a scale where that's necessary yet, but it's something I'm kind of like thinking about if we were to scale out further.
Awesome. I know we don't have too much time left, so I want to talk about another topic we got a lot of questions for in the registration form. So PLG and product-led sales, like what do those playbooks look like? So using product intent to inform your sales team. We got some questions about, one was what was the decision-making process around using PLS as a motion? Like why was that a decision Vercel made? And then the other question is, how are you using that data to then qualify leads for the sales team? And where are you drawing the lines between self-serve and what goes to sales?
Yeah, when you're getting into PLG, PLS, it kind of like, you have to think really about what your product structure is or pricing structure is, and then what your top of funnel looks like. So for Vercel, we have a free tier of the product, a hobby tier. We have a self-serve tier where you just kind of add your own credit card through Stripe or whatever, and you're on your way. And then there's like the enterprise tier, which is a sales-led conversation. And I think it was Elena Verna actually said something really good on a podcast once that stuck with me. And PLG is a very effective strategy for self-serve revenue. So the product itself can do a good job of communicating value to an individual or to a team level even. But so that's where you'll sit in the product and like create cool journeys and do lots of experimentation. It's very growth marketing-y. But then as soon as like you start reaching like a 5-figure deal size and you have to start selling more org-wide, that's where you really have to bring in a salesperson. And that's where you lean into like product-led sales territory. So that's kind of the split for me, is self-serve versus sales-led. Product-led sales, really, again, like big buzzword, but the definition, the same as what we said at the beginning of this conversation, is like surfacing any sort of buying intent signal from somebody who's potentially in your enterprise ICP. Surfacing that to the salesperson to either like manually go out and strategically sell and multi-thread, or automating the outreach in the same way that we're doing with like website intent signals, for example. So we've started with some really obvious ones as well, like you clicked through a certain feature or button in the product that's gated for enterprise, we're going to reach out to you. You can be a little bit smarter, especially with the developer community, and try to guess like when people are blocked in the product and have a good demographic score, and just be really helpful. So for example, maybe they clicked on a section in the dashboard, they went to a doc, they came back and then exited their session. Like there are things you can do to reach out to those folks. Again, only if they're an enterprise fit. Anyway, you can even like put declared intent CTAs in the product to tie that in. So we have like an enterprise trial CTA, which is basically just a sales-led POC, but we sprinkled that CTA throughout. We're probably going to play around with some different offers. So there's a lot. That's like a very large topic. There's a lot you can do there. But I would just look at kind of like, do you have a large set of people signing up for your free product every day? Are you seeing that your closed won enterprise deals actually are with people who have tried out your product for free in the first place, and then try and decide if that's a strategy worth investing in or not?
I love that. And definitely this is a topic that we could spend a whole other like half hour to an hour diving into. I love that you mentioned that you've kind of almost like reverse engineered getting to declared intent in the product by like sprinkling those opportunities in. I think that's super smart. And I think something that you could think about in other places as well. It's like my goal is to try and get the most certainty on intent. So how do I like reverse engineer some of that? We did a webinar with Kyle Coleman, who's now CMO at Copy AI, but prior to that was at Clary. And he said something similar where he was like, he called it manufacturing warmth. Because like your goal is to try and warm up your accounts, your leads. And you can't always just wait for them to get to that point. But like, how can you like sprinkle things in that are going to like, reverse engineer your way into that intent or that warmth?
Yeah, like a lot of it honestly is like getting more into like creating good content journeys and like in product journeys, things like that. But the easiest, like low hanging fruit really is give people more opportunities to hand raise in places where you think they might be ready to purchase. So if that's just sprinkling a bunch of contact sales-esque CTAs about, like that's an easy place to start. And then have, you know, part of your demand gen team, like we have focused on making sure that the funnel after people fill out that contact sales form is like super tight.
Yeah. With our last minute, any kind of like just high level advice for folks who are starting to think about building these intent-based playbooks, any pitfalls to avoid, any potential landmines that you think you should get ahead?
Yeah. I think just like don't be intimidated by it. Don't overcomplicate it. Just really think about like if I'm an enterprise prospect in my ICP, like what kind of actions might I be taking? I would start with like the strongest intent signals and work your way backwards. Think about like what are, like for us, you know, security, for example, is a big driver for people to upgrade to enterprise. So we're like, okay, let's put some events on our security docs pages and like start to look at who's visiting those pages and create campaigns. So I would just start there. Make sure that you have like a good tech stack and a really tight partnership with your ops team. Bring sales along for the journey so that they're very bought in and you have that invaluable feedback from them as well. And yeah, it's just like there's so much you can do, but just find the most obvious places to start, and then you're going to just keep iterating from there.
I love that. Thank you so much, Angelica. I think my main takeaway from this is you've made me feel better about kind of like this whole space. And I feel you simplified it to the point of it feels very attainable for even the smallest team with the least amount of resources to get started with something like this. And I think given that our future, I think, is heading in this direction, all teams need to start getting on board. And it's just about getting your feet wet, like you said. So really appreciate you walking us through everything that you're doing at Vercel. It sounds incredible, and appreciate you breaking it down and simplifying it for the rest of us. And yeah, please keep in touch with the community, and we'll hopefully get some more opportunities to chat with you about how things look in 6 months.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was great. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you at the next one.
Bye.
Bye.